Hi, welcome to Vet Talks. I'm your host, Mike Moses. We're pleased to bring you to our second episode of Vet Talks. And let me say now that so much of you have supported me. We really have received a lot of positive reaction to the first show, where we focused on employment for veterans. Today, you'll meet some veterans who are making a difference here in the community. My first guest is Delegate C.T. Wilson. You'll see him dealing with issues in Annapolis. What you might not know is that at one time, he also served in the United States Army. Welcome to Vet Talks.
Thank you for having me.
Can you kind of give us some background about your veteran background, your military career and whatnot?
Well, oddly enough, I always joke around. I didn't join the military as a patriot, but I sure left as one. I grew up the oldest of 17 children, and I was in and out of foster homes and even worse. And so by the time I was 18, I kind of didn't have any other option. I wasn't going to college because I barely graduated high school. Okay. So as soon as I could, at 18 years old, I joined the United States Army. We had the first Persian Gulf War was going, and I figured that, my life was pretty bad already. War couldn't be any worse. And so I joined the Army. Okay. As an enlisted soldier.
Okay. How did the Army help your career?
Obviously, by the fact we're sitting here talking, it did have a great deal of influence because it gave me a lot of structure and discipline that I did not have, and the wherewithal showed you can accomplish anything. If you can do an 8-mile march, you can definitely read a book. And it gave me the strength to go forward and just accomplish my goals. And as you well know, that there's no excuses. In the military, you're given a task. You got to complete that task. So after the Army, college wasn't that bad. Law school definitely was not that hard because I'd done much more difficult tasks with much less resources.
Okay. Can you tell us what's happening in Annapolis and what do you see happening for veterans as far as veterans benefits?
Well, right now I'm currently the vice chair of the Veterans Caucus, the General Assembly. Should be moving to the chair of the Veterans Caucus next year. And we're really focused, one of my biggest focuses is the mental health issue with veterans. I think that a lot of returning veterans, we have the Vietnam era veterans, we have the first Persian Gulf era veterans, and now we have these young folks returning from combat. Many of them have gone through multiple tours, and they come back, there are some mental issues that need to be dealt with. And unfortunately, until we remove the stigmata attached, many of these folks won't even get diagnosed. So we're working on ways to open that door, give them access to mental health, family counseling, things of that nature, once they've left the military, for themselves, their spouses, and their families, to make sure that there is a transition. And additionally, we have now passed some bills that make it easier for individuals to transition out of the military. Make sure that their credits are accepted, that our service credits that what we've learned and earned while we were in are accepted at all of our institutions of higher learning. So if you're a combat medic, you shouldn't have to wait 6 months in order to be an EMT. They should be able to accept those credits, and we're making sure that we have a standard to where our entire state understands these folks have already served. They might not have been sitting through the classes in college, but they have already put this in practice, what most of us just learn in a book. Okay. So we're trying to do that, make sure they can transition, because we want them to come back. That's the thing. That's one of our most valuable resources in this state are our veterans. We want them to come back after they've served. We want them to come back. We want them to be educated, and we want them to be part of our workforce. Okay. So that's one of the things. Another thing we're doing is something called veterans courts. This is something, as a former prosecutor, I take a lot of interest in, because I do know that some of the soldiers that we have out there, they come back and self-medicate. Some of the things that they do, but for their service to this country, for our privileges, they would not be in trouble today. And unless you've been in, you might not understand, but that's why we need people who have been in to sit as judge and jury, making sure that they get the fair shake they can and that the circumstances are mitigated when it's possible. This is not lowering a standard. This is not saying that violence, things of that are okay, but it's just making sure that they're judged correctly for what they've done, and what they've also done for this country is at least brought to light.
Okay. Mr. Wilson, will there anything be done, or you all thinking about in Annapolis of helping the spouse?
Well, we are working to make sure that the spouses can also transition out. And a lot of times spouses have a very difficult time moving and losing their jobs. And like, say, teachers in a certain state, you know, they follow their husbands around. They're in Hawaii, and then they come to Maryland. Well, they're not certified to teach in Maryland. So what we're trying to do now is also make it easier to exchange those certifications for active duty veterans and their spouses. So they just can transition. They don't have to go through additional schooling, things of that nature. We can streamline the process. So yes, we're working to keep the spouses employed and so they can follow around. I know there's nothing more difficult than being a military spouse, but being an unemployed military spouse is even more difficult. So at least on the employment side, that's what we've tackled this last session.
Okay. There are a lot of young men in our neighborhoods and whatnot who may want to seek military. What would you advise them? How would you advise them to go ahead and possibly join the military? Would that be a good point?
I think that my situation, especially coming when I didn't really have anything, the military is what got me where I am. Had it not been for me, I'm not talking about paying for my college, because of course it did that too, but also just giving me what it takes to survive on my own. And a lot of times there's a lot of young men out there who they're missing that structure, discipline. Some of them just missing the self-confidence it takes to go to college. But as I learned quickly in the military, you know, you're working a full-time job and then going to college online or on video. So going to college by itself really wasn't that big of a deal. I think the military is a phenomenal first step for our citizens of our state and our country. I wish that more young people would decide to enlist at least for 3 years just to see, and also get a change your perspective. If you go to other countries, you will then realize just how amazing this country is. And when you get back, you will go at it with more gusto than you know, because you'll see the opportunity that's laid out before you. It may not be easy, but it is at least there.
Okay. So you feel the same way with the young ladies as well?
Oh, of course, and I use this term loosely. You want young men and women, it's the same thing. I think today's military is designed for both men and women, all branches, and I believe that young ladies can get just as much out of it as the men can.
Okay.
They're serving pretty much every aspect that the men serve now, and I definitely have no problems. I think that's a great idea for the young women to go out there and do the same thing.
Okay. Delegate C.T. Wilson, thank you so much for joining us today on Vets Talks. Hope to come see you again.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. There's lots more coming up on Vets Talk. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Come here.
I love you, Dad.
Welcome back to Vet Talks, a show about helping vets. My next guest served in the Air Force for nearly a decade. And during that time, he also went to college to go to law school. I'm pleased to have as a guest Charles County State's Attorney, Tony Convington, with us today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
A lot of people may not know exactly that you were a veteran. Can you kind of give me some feedback on your background, whatnot?
Well, my father was an officer in the United States Army. He went through ROTC at Morgan State College back in the day. And when I went to school, South Carolina State College, I went into the Air Force ROTC.
Okay.
So I graduated college and took my commission as an officer in the United States Air Force. Was a signals intelligence officer, was my AFSC, as we called it, I think, in the Army. Everybody else called it MOS, but Air Force AFSC, that was my job title. And went to training out in Colorado and in Texas, and then ended up at, believe it or not, right next to where I grew up in Fort Meade, Maryland, at the National Security Agency, NSA, who has a large contingent of military up there doing part of their job along with the civilians. So that's how I did it, and I did about 8 years in the Air Force. Loved every bit of it. While I was in, I went to law school, on my own time. Obviously, the Air Force helped with some of the costs, but that was on my own time while I was still doing my full-time intelligence thing.
So what about your family? You come from a strong family of military?
Oh yeah, like I said, my dad was in the Army. Went to Vietnam. He was in Vietnam. He died actually here in the States, but also my older brother. He went in the Air Force, was an officer in the Air Force. my couple of nephews, one was in the Army, was over in Iraq. He's back now, thank God. My other nephew just enlisted into the Navy a little while ago. He's doing well. My brother-in-law, he just made E9 in the Navy, so we're real proud of him. And he and my sister have been together for a long time. So got a whole lot of folks serving this country in the Convington clan. So,
excellent. Yes.
So we like that.
Thank you. As state's attorney, and I might add the first African-American state's attorney of Charles County, how do you feel about that? How do you feel? You feel like a pioneer?
Well, I said a long time ago, one, it's funny that it took so long. One wouldn't think of that. But it really doesn't matter unless I do a good job. And I'm trying to do a good job. I think hopefully I've opened some doors there, but of course that wasn't my intent. My intent was to get into a position where I could, what I believe can do a lot of good. It's what I think I'm supposed to be doing in this life, so that's what I'm doing.
Okay. Do you think at this particular time veterans are really aware of their benefits?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I know that, actually I know that a lot are not, that I meet personally. I know a lot are not aware of the benefits that they have out there, but I know folks like yourself and other folks are trying to do a better job and making them aware of it and getting them to the places where they need to exercise those.
Okay. From your experience being a seasoned veteran, what would you recommend for some of the veterans who are just coming out now who want to get into fields of your nature and whatnot, your environment?
Well, obviously, I think always, training and whatever it is, whatever your education is, folks should, if they can, depending upon their field in the military, capitalize on all the training that Uncle Sam gave you and put you through. I mean, that's number one. Two, use the benefits for your education, either while you're in or it's definitely when you get out. A good friend of mine enlisted in the Army when he was a youngster. He did, I think, 6 years. He came out, used his GI Bill to go to college. Then after that, he went to law school, all with the help of Uncle Sam. And now he's a local lawyer here who you probably know, who took very good advantage of what I think he earned being a veteran coming out. So they got to take advantage of it.
Okay. We know that you are very much into helping people, particularly women who have been abused. Tell us why you became so much socially active in that area.
It's interesting. Somebody asked me just the other day about that, and I think people assume that somehow, somewhere, that's been part of my personal story, and it hasn't. I've not had anything of that nature in my family, immediate or extended that I know of anyway. But I remember my father, that airborne ranger, was you never, ever put your hands on a woman. And that's inside of me. And it just, from a personal standpoint, really irks me. That's the least of it. When that happens and goes on out there. And I don't think anybody, I don't like bullies, and folks shouldn't bully other people. Folks shouldn't bully people in their own household. And folks should not have to be afraid in their own home. I mean, it's just one of those things. So that's how I came to it. I don't have a great story on that or anything like that. I don't have a survival story or anything to tell you. It's just something that I believed in from a young age, and as a prosecutor, you see it all the time. A quarter of our cases deal with domestic violence, 25%. And that's the ones that are reported that come to the police. So it's a huge problem in not just this county, but this state and the country. And somebody should do something about it, and I'm trying to do my part.
Are you going to be active in the community or something of that nature? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to be. We're having meetings. We're pulling our resources together. I've gotten some more resources. In fact, we're trying to have shortly, I'm glad you asked that question, we're trying to have what I'm going to call a summit of some sort where the different players, because there are many people out there who are trying to assist on this individually. I want to try to bring everybody together and see if we can, multiply, have a force multiplier, if you will, on that, getting the resources, shelters, more programs, things like that.
Possibly you'll be able to work on something in a direction with the veterans as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That'd be good. I'll be looking forward to that.
Okay.
Tony, thank you so much for coming out on my show. And don't go away. We'll be right back. We'll hear about the new museum in Newburgh, Maryland, dedicated and honoring the veterans. from all military branches.
Barry, time is running out. According to my calculations, 1 in 5 kids in America struggles with hunger. How can so many children face hunger when there's more than enough food to feed them all?
Babadoo.
You're right, Barry. We can help solve hunger by teaming up with Feeding America to get food to hungry kids in communities across the country.
Help Flint and the Feeding America network of food banks get food to the people who need it in your community. Find your local Feeding America food bank at feedingamerica.org/hunger.
Together, we're Feeding America.
"7,000 high school students drop out every school day. That's a line of desks more than 4 miles long. We can keep students in school. Visit boostup.org and take the first step."
Welcome back. It's been a decade in the making. I'm talking about the Maryland Veterans Memorial Museum in Newburgh. I'm pleased to have today as the president of the museum, Larry Abell. Welcome.
Why, thank you. And I'm very pleased to be here and join you to talk about the museum.
Tell me how I got started.
Well, roughly about 12 years ago, the county commissioners got together with a number of veterans, Colonel Wade, George Dyson. They were kind of the founding ones, also the first presidents, following each other respectively, and talked about putting together a museum. There was no location. It was just an idea. And the old Glasgow School became available, and frankly, they were going to tear it down. It was due to be demolished, and the veterans stepped down and asked the commissioners would they allow the veterans to use it as a museum, and so that was the embryo of what's taking place today.
Okay, so actually, what is your mission of the museum?
Well, the mission of the museum is simple: to remember and honor Maryland's veterans. That's our goal. But in accomplishing that, we're doing everything from covering the Revolutionary War right on up to the present Gulf War.
Okay. Explain some of the type of exhibits that you have.
Well, because this is the centennial celebrations of the War of 1812 and also of the Civil War, roughly 100. Basically, what we're trying to do is emphasize on those because everybody is interested. And the War of 1812 for Maryland is a big thing. And the state, as well as the county and the surrounding counties, are doing a lot of things to emphasize the War of 1812. So we have just a wonderful exhibit covering everything from when the war began right on up to the British landing on the shores of Benedict, some 4,500 strong. And an interesting little story is there was resistance that's not normally covered, but apparently the group decided that they would try to wipe out the British by giving them some poison alcohol. I think it was called whiskey, kind of laden down. And a Mr. Dorsey decided maybe that wasn't a good idea, so he told the British, which as a consequence of that, that probably saved a lot of local people over in Benedict from being damaged as a result of the retaliation of the British. But there's so many interesting stories about what happened with their own local history that we're also trying to cover. Okay.
Give me some idea about your African American history as far as military service that you have.
Well, it's I think that many people don't realize the role of the African American in our country's history, and they don't realize the plight that the African American went through to actually participate and be accepted in the military. And the first effort was around 1861. There was an African American, Congress actually approved African American regiments. And there was a regiment, it was primarily the Kansas Regiment, and they were involved in fighting the Indians. And because they did such a beautiful job and they were so tenacious in their fighting, they became known as the Buffalo Soldiers.
Okay, okay.
And so that's kind of the story of how that the African Americans were involved. But there's also a story here in Maryland, too, which we're doing research on. There were African American regiments in Maryland. And one of the beautiful parts about the museum is we're actually able to go and do studies to try to bring out this history, bring it back to life, and try to find out what local people perhaps were involved in it.
Okay.
But there's an interesting little story.
Okay.
In the Buffalo Soldiers, and I love this story, there was a Buffalo soldier called William Cathy. And William Cathy managed to fight along with the troops for basically about a year, and was apparently had some medical problems, was hurt in one of the battles. And so he goes in to see the doctor, and the doctor discovered there was missing parts, and it was Cathy Williams instead of William Cathy fighting along. Unfortunately, she was drummed out after that, and she continued to try to get back in the military, but they couldn't find a role for her.
Okay. Now, you mentioned an interesting part. What about the women in the military? Do you have any displays about women in the military?
We have a beautiful display on women in the military, and it's part of it is because, as you know, just in this past year, women were approved to fight on the front line in combat. Quite frankly, I guess my knowledge of history was limited to the fact I thought this was probably something brand new. But also women have been very much involved in fighting online. And there's an interesting story about a lady by the name of Elizabeth Corbin. And that's right here in our back door at Fort Washington in the Revolutionary War. And she and her husband together were fighting the British. She was apparently loading his gun and he was firing away. Well, he was shot and killed right there while she was defending. So she picks up the gun and continues shooting.
Okay.
And because everybody was so impressed, the military decided they would give her a uniform and issue her half pay. She was worth half as much as as the men soldiers. But there's so many little stories like that about how women have participated, and so it's nothing new. Our women have been there all along.
Okay. Special areas of interest. Could you just give me some feedback on what area is special?
Well, one of the things that we have really picked up on is the MIA and POWs. Okay. The MIAs are largely forgotten, and a good example was William DeSales here in the local area. DeSales Mudd, he was in Vietnam, fought in Vietnam, 1966. He went out on a patrol and never came back.
Okay.
And quite frankly, any of us that fought in Vietnam, there probably wasn't a day that went by that we didn't think, well, the same thing could happen to me. So just the fact that we honor him kind of reinforces our feeling for someone that was very much in the local community.
Okay, okay.
The other thing that we have done is we are looking out for the wounded warriors. Okay. We are, as you know, you're involved in the DAV, and we have adopted that cause as well, and we're trying to help out those that are wounded as best we can. We are honoring the Maryland 400, which, if you don't know about the Maryland 400, that was the very first battle, mostly local soldiers and warriors that went to New York to support General Washington in the Battle of New York. And of course, 256 out of that 400 were killed, and are missing today
Right.
down to the streets of New York.
Okay. Now, the museum, what are the hours and the times and days that's available for the public?
Well, the museum is open on Saturdays and Sundays, 12 to 5. And the other interesting time that we're open is on the second Wednesday of every month. We have a lecture series. We have our board meeting before, and we have a lecture series afterwards. The public's welcome to our board meetings, but we usually publish it in the paper, what the lecture is going to be, and a lot of times it's very historical topics, and other times it's just things that are of interest to the local area.
Okay. In conclusion, tell me about your fundraiser. Are you having some type of fundraiser to help you with the museum?
Well, July 20th, we're having a fundraiser at Swan Point Country Club. We have Linda Reno, who's the author of the Maryland 400, and she'll give a much better story line than I did.
Okay.
And she'll do a book signing and have a little presentation, and we'll have a dinner. We'll have the information posted online, or they can just call me at my number.
Okay. And just for the record, you are a veteran, correct?
I am a veteran. I'm a
Okay.
Navy veteran, Civil Engineer Corps,
Okay.
Seabees.
Okay. Okay.
And I spent a good chunk of my tour on the shores of Vietnam,
Okay.
designing military facilities throughout Vietnam.
Okay. Well, Larry, thanks so much for coming and sharing your information about the Maryland Veterans Memorial Museum in Newburgh, Maryland. And if you can, go out there, enjoy yourself. I'm sure you'll learn something about our history. I want to thank all our guests, and remember, you can catch Vet Talks right here on Charles County Public Access Channel. Also, look us up on YouTube. If you like to see the first Vet Talks, just type in Vet Talks episode. See you next time on Vet Talks.